A couple of weeks had passed for the group. The cabin was becoming more like a real home. Over the course of the last few weeks, Clementine had enjoyed herself. She had spent less time worrying about her new parents and more time being carefree. She wasn't as tense as she was anymore. As much persistence, Clementine and Rebecca were finally able to get Carlos to agree having Sarah outside to enjoy the crisp and cool weather. Both girls spent their time collecting their leaves that already had fallen. Rebecca and Connie watched them. "These are really pretty. It feels like it's been forever since I've collected leaves," Sarah said. "Same here," Clementine said. She stopped when she heard a crunching of the leaves. It wasn't Sarah, since the older girl was behind her. Clementine started to back away with the sound of crunching leaves. Whoever was walking on leaves was getting closer. "Clem?" Sarah asked. "Sarah, we need to get back to the house," Clementine said. Before she could say anything else, she ran over to her adoptive mother. She must have noticed her behavior since she was standing up and looking over at the two girls. "Sarah, come over here," Rebecca exclaimed. Connie raced past Clementine and ran towards Sarah, who was approaching the cabin. Connie raised her hunting rifle up and shielded Sarah. "Come on out here now," Connie demanded. A couple of seconds passed and a woman came by. She looked pale from where Clementine stood. "Please, help," the woman said before she collapsed. Clementine watched her wide eyes as Sarah jumped. We gotta help her," Sarah said. "Go inside and get your dad. We'll see what we can do," Connie said. Sarah obliged with a nod as she ran inside the cabin. Rebecca walked over to Clementine. Walking alongside her, Connie crouched down and checked the woman for a pulse. "Is she okay?" Rebecca asked. "She's got a weak pulse, and she's warm," Connie said. Clementine heard footsteps approaching to look to see Carlos running towards them. She crouched down and checked the woman. "We'll get her inside, get her out of this cold," Carlos said. He looked up and said, "Clementine, go inside." Clementine nodded and then went towards the door. Pete and Luke rushed out of the house before she could get inside. They were running towards the woman. Clementine looked to see that most of the group were surrounding the woman. She didn't shake the feeling of something that didn't seem right. The woman didn't look right. She stepped aside and watched as several group members took her inside. "Come on, honey," Alvin said, as he gestured for her to walk right next to him. Clementine walked alongside him as she entered the cabin. Sarah was at the table with a frightened look on her face. "Sarah?" Rebecca said, as she went over to the table. Clementine walked over to join them. "Is that woman going to be okay?" Sarah asked. "I don't know, honey. Your dad is going to look after her," Rebecca said. She looked at Clementine. She said, "Are you all right? You froze out there." I don't know. It's just something was off about that woman," Clementine said. "Do you know her?" Rebecca asked. Clementine shook her head and she said, "I don't think so." "Hey, Beck," Alvin said as he popped his head from the living room. "Carlos is holding an emergency meeting." "Stay here, both of you," Rebecca said. She got up. She left the kitchen and went towards the living room with Alvin. "What do you think is going on, Clem?" Sarah asked. I don't know," Clementine said. She got up and went to the door. "Wait, Clem, you can't go there." "Not yet, anyway," Sarah said. "I know. I need to know what's going on," Clementine said as she pressed her ear against the door. "Clem, stop it. That's eavesdropping," Sarah said. However, Clementine didn't listen. She needed to know what was going on. Sarah looked to her anxious stare. The teen must have kept wondering why the young girl wasn't listening to her. "She's bit by a lurker," Carlo's voice was heard. "Oh my gosh," Luke muttered. "Fuck," Nick added. "What can we do if she's bit?" Rebecca asked. "That means she'll turn any minute now." "Connie and I are handling the situation. Maybe we could save this woman, Carlos said. "Where's my mom?" Nick asked. "She's up." Before Carlos could continue, there was an ear-piercing scream that echoed throughout the cabin. Clementine gasped and she started to back away from the door. She heard the group scrambling upstairs. That sounded like Connie," Sarah said. Rebecca rushed to the kitchen to see Clementine looking at her with eyes wide. "It's all right," Rebecca said. She pulled Clementine in for a hug of the comfort the young frightened girl. "No!" Nick's voice was heard. This was evident, sad and angry tone to it. Clementine didn't even have to guess what happened. She knew what happened. The woman reanimated and killed Connie. She knew this was going to happen. She knew that someone she cared about was going to die. Zeke did his best to keep the fire going while Omid cradled his daughter in his arms. The toddler was 18 months old and was starting to string together coherent words that the boy and the man could understood. Despite all they'd been through, Genevieve was rather healthy. Zeke had hit a few growth spurts and was now taller than Omid. He looked up to Omid and shook his head. "The wood's too wet to burn," Zeke whispered. He didn't want to wake the toddler. Omid huffed and said, "All right." He got up and handed the toddler to Zeke. Genevieve's eyes opened as she looked to Omid. "I'm going to look for more wood. Watch her," Omid said, and turned away to walk off from Zeke and Genevieve. The toddler in Zeke's arms whimpered a little, but he comforted her. Zeke walked up and went over to the fallen log where Omid sat earlier. He and Omid were running on fumes. Zeke may have taken care of his little brother when he was younger, but that he didn't have to worry about walkers and people around that time. Genevieve was back to sleep in no time, but the sound of the arguing brought Zeke out of thoughts. The argument was close by, and he had to fight every instinct to run. If he ran, he would have separated Genevieve only from the family she had left, but she wasn't going to put himself and the baby in danger. All it took was a sound for him to bolt from the campsite to go in the opposite direction of yelling. That sound was heard from the gunshot. Several other tense-filled seconds, Zeke heard it. It sounded like gunshots. Without thinking twice, Zeke grabbed Genevieve's bag and ran into the opposite direction. As he did so, the toddler in his arms cried. The gunshot had frightened her. "Shh, it's okay, Jen. Shh," Zeke said to try to calm the toddler down. After a while it worked, but it was too late. Her cries had woken up the entire forest of dormant walkers were awake, and they were walking towards the toddler's screams. Plus Zeke knew these people would chase after him, and he would have to run for his life and the toddler's life. Zeke huffed and reached the campsite. He had ran off in last a few miles upon stumbling the campsite. Genevieve had finally calmed down and went back to sleep. Zeke looked around until he saw a rusted van. He climbed in with Genevieve and closed the door shut. He was surprised that the toddler didn't wake up from that screech that the door made. Zeke lay down and immediately fell asleep, despite sleeping on the floor of the vehicle. In the morning, Zeke groaned as he opened his eyes. He saw Genevieve on top of him. She was looking down at him with curious eyes. "Dada?" the toddler asked. Zeke knew what she meant. "I don't know where Dada is, but we're going to find him," Zeke said. The toddler lowered her head in response. She understood, but she also was saddened that her father was missing. "I think I have a granola bar with me. We'll have that for breakfast for sure," Zeke said as he picked up the toddler. He sat down with the baby on his lap. She ended up looking around with curious eyes. She had never been in a vehicle before. "Car?" Genevieve asked. "Yeah, we're in a car, Genevieve," Zeke said. The toddler babbled a bit as Zeke went through his bag and pulled out a granola bar. "Make sure you chew," Zeke said as he broke off a small bite-sized pieces of the granola bar. After several minutes of hand-feeding Genevieve, the first granola bar was gone. Zeke ate his granola bar and placed the toddler on the seat and went outside to look at the surrounding camp. He looked back to Genevieve, who was following behind him. She made a babble and giggled a bit as she followed him. "You want to help me?" Zeke asked. Genevieve nodded her head in response. "Okay, you do what I say, okay?" Zeke said. Genevieve only responded with a blank stare. "I take that as an okay," Zeke said, as he walked around the camp with the toddler, cradling up as best he could. She was still struggling with walking. However, that was normal for her age. Zeke checked the campsite with the toddler by his side. Unfortunately, this search came up empty-handed. He couldn't find anything that would help him or the toddler that was with him. "Well, that bites," Zeke muttered. He turned to Genevieve and said, "All right, kid, how about I change you and then we keep going through the forest, okay?" The toddler responded with the baby battle that he didn't understand. "Well, that's my plan," Zeke said. He picked up the toddler and carried her to the van. After changing her, he placed her in the carrier, strapped it on his back. Zeke then went further into the forest with the toddler cooing and making baby babble. He didn't mind if she did that, as long as she didn't do any crying. Zeke sighed as he continued through the forest. He felt like something was off. He may have been a bit paranoid, but he had to be. There was the only way he's lived for that long. Zeke knew in every direction until he saw it. He saw a walker limping towards him. It appeared to be the only one, but then a couple more appeared behind the trees. Before he knew it, he was in a whole herd of walkers limping towards him and Genevieve. I really hate this area, Zeke muttered. He then turned around to find an opening. He noticed that two walkers limped into his path. He took one of them out with his knife and was ready to attack the other, but the arrow hit the walker from the side. Zeke's eyes widened and looked to his right to see an older man with a crossbow and a younger man with a machete. "This way," the younger man said. He slashed at a nearby walker. Zeke didn't have to be told twice. He went over to the two men and ran past him. He could hear the footsteps behind him as they ran away from the herd. He was lucky to be alive. After running for several minutes, Zeke and two men stopped to catch their breaths. I think we lost them," the older man said. He was hunched over, gasping for air. The younger man looked back and saw the way they came. "Yeah, we're good." He looked at Zeke and said, "You all right, kid?" "Yeah," Zeke said, with an untrusting glance at the two. "Why did you two help me?" "Well, this isn't obvious. You needed help," the younger man said. "Now, that doesn't make sense. People usually help for one or two reasons nowadays. You either want to earn my trust or me lowering your gun to have something in return," Zeke said. "That may be how the world now works nowadays, but not us," the older man said. "How am I supposed to believe you?" Zeke asked. "How about you just give us a chance? We got a couple of kids back there," the younger man said. "We're not people." Zeke relaxed upon hearing that the two men had kids. Families. That's always a good thing, but I'd rather see it for myself. "All right, name's Luke, by the way," the younger man said, as he and the older man started to walk again. Zeke walked next to them. "I'm Pete," the older man said. "I'm Zeke. The little one is Genevieve," Zeke said. Luke smiled upon seeing the toddler. "Hey there," Luke said with a smile. Genevieve smiled back and started to speak in baby babble. "Yeah, tell me about it." Pete chuckled and said, "I'll take a guess she ain't your baby sister." "Nah, she belonged to a friend of mine. Her mother died from childbirth and I got separated from her father," Zeke said. "What about your own parents? I mean, you're not that old yourself," Luke said. "I'd rather not talk about it," Zeke said. Luke and Pete looked at each other with questioning stares. They must have noticed the malice in his voice. He was still bitter towards his parents with the situation that put him and his brother in. "Fair enough," Luke said. "Well, how about you rest up at the cabin? After all, it can be easy looking after a baby by yourself," Pete said. "There's a bit of a challenge. I certainly would like to take a rest," Zeke said. He hated to admit it, but he was starting to trust these people. There you go," Luke said. The two men let him past the fence, and Luke said, "Listen, everyone's a bit tense, so they might snap your head off. I know Nick certainly will." "Thanks for the heads up," Zeke muttered. "Sorry, it's just how things are right now," Luke replied. "Well, we're here," Pete said as he walked out of the forest into the opening. "Home sweet home." Zeke walked to the side of the two men and could have had a better look. He rather saw a nice cabin with some firewood stacked on the deck. There was also a shed not too far from it. "Cozy," Zeke said.